The Freedom Charter. The paper that promised heaven and delivered nothing. They said it was written by the people. That the masses gathered, spoke, dreamed, and their dreams were stitched together into the great political fabric called the Freedom Charter. That is a lie. The Freedom Charter was not a dream from the grassroots. It was a Soviet-scripted manual, pre-written, pre-planned, and imposed through a carefully managed process disguised as consultation. The family for the collective, and economic freedom for state control. Let's tell the truth now. The myth of mass participation. We are told that 50,000 people across the country submitted demands in 1955. That ordinary men and women from townships, villages, farms, and factories all sent in their dreams. But where are those documents? Where is the archive of the voices? The truth, there was no mass authorship, only mass mobilization. The charter was not the people's song. It was a foreign melody imposed on local instruments. A charter without a soul. The Freedom Charter speaks of, the people shall share in the country's wealth. It sounds righteous. But who are the people? 30 years later, we see what it truly meant. Party-aligned elites shall share. Tenderpreneurs, not township mothers, shall benefit. Cadres, not communities, shall eat. The factories were not built. The mines were not given to workers. Instead, a bloated state with bloated friends grew fatter while the rest begged for grants. This is not economic freedom. It is ideological cannibalism. The Gospel according to Marx. Look at the clauses. The land shall be shared among those who work it. All industry and the banks shall be controlled by the people. Education shall be free, compulsory, and equal. These are not African ideas. These are not even South African struggles distilled into a vision. These are Soviet slogans, slightly softened for township ears. It's no accident that many of the Charter's architects were members of the South African Communist Party, trained in Moscow, polished in Lenin's schools. What they drafted was not a pathway to freedom. It was a blueprint for state control. The tragedy of misplaced faith. Black South Africans, brutalized by apartheid, yearned for justice. And into that yearning was inserted the Freedom Charter, a document that sounded like hope, but functioned like a bait-and-switch trap. We replaced the apartheid state with a new form of control. Instead of freedom, we got dependency. Instead of dignity, we got grants. Instead of opportunity, we got gatekeepers at every corner of the economy. The future demands honesty. We will never be free until we are honest. The Freedom Charter is not sacred. It is not untouchable. It is not the Bible. It must be interrogated, rejected where false, redeemed where necessary, and most importantly, replaced with a philosophy rooted not in imported communism, but in self-reliance, family strength, bottom-up capitalism, and spiritual wholeness. Let us rise above slogans. Let us build beyond charters. Let us free the mind before we ask to free the land.
Let's expose the stealth capture of the ANC by the South African Communist Party, SACP, a calculated, multi-stage operation that changed the soul of the party forever. Here's the breakdown. This is a plan that was developed by white communists in Russia. It was called Blueprint for South Africa. How the SACP hijacked the ANC. The silent coup. People think the ANC just changed. No, it was hijacked, infiltrated, engineered from within. This visual shows you exactly how the South African Communist Party, SACP, took over what was once a Christian, moral movement of prayerful African patriots. Step 1. Join ANC and begin to influence policy. In the 1940s-1950s, white communists and Soviet-trained operatives quietly joined the ANC. They didn't come to follow. They came to reprogram. Names like Joe Slovo bedded themselves in the party and began whispering about class struggle, state power, and armed revolution. Step 2. Gain leadership position. Within organization, they were patient, strategic. They gained influence not by charisma, but by ideological loyalty and international backing from the USSR. By the early 1960s, the ANC was sharing leadership with the SACP, often secretly. Mandela himself became a full member of the SACP Central Committee, a fact confirmed only after his death. Step 3. Shift policy direction. Gradually, over time. Then came the ideological shift. The Freedom Charter, 1955, became the Trojan Horse, a pretty-sounding list of people's rights, filled with state seizure of land, banks, and mines. Marxism cloaked in the language of liberation. The old Christian leaders, Dube, Magatho, Rubusana, were silenced, forgotten, or co-opted. The ANC slowly became a vehicle for Soviet-style socialism, not African moral democracy. Step 4. Launch verbal attacks on establishment figures. Once the takeover was complete, the SACP-aligned ANC turned vicious. Missionaries were branded colonizers. Christians were sidelined. The family was mocked as bourgeois. Critics were labeled sellouts, counter-revolutionaries, or reactionaries. Anyone who questioned the ideological line was purged, ridiculed, or made irrelevant. Conclusion: what you thought was liberation was a leftist coup. This wasn't just politics. This was a hostile ideological occupation of the oldest liberation movement in Africa. The SACP didn't build the ANC. They stole it. And South Africa today is not suffering from mismanagement. It is suffering from the long-term consequences of that infiltration. A bloated state, a dependent population, corruption as governance, race-based law, and the total destruction of the moral and spiritual compass.